Hello and welcome to October's Breaking Barriers LinkedIn Live. My name's Rachel Schofield. I'm your host today, as always, for our monthly LinkedIn Live, and I'm one of the senior facilitators with Shape Talent, a diversity, equity and inclusion consultancy working with large companies around the world. We're doing something really interesting this month and very topical because Friday, in case you hadn't realised, in 3 days' time is World Menopause Day. And so it's a topic that we really wanted to talk about. It's often overlooked as an aspect of workplace equality and talent management, but no more. So we are calling our LinkedIn Live this month, Supporting Menopause at Work, from Taboo to Business Standard. And we like a little pun. So we say standard because we want to make it something very normal and normalized. But also, you may not know, but the BSI has released a standard all about menopause and menstrual health. So that is one of the things that is the focus of our discussion today. I have three fantastic guests. Anne Hayes from the BSI is Director of Sectors and Standards Development, and we'll discuss the groundbreaking BSI standard on this topic. I'm also joined by Lynn Bartholomew from Ericsson. Hi, Lynn, who is going to share her own experiences, her own journey through perimenopause and menopause, and also talk about Ericsson's innovative approach to supporting women in that space. And also with us is our founder and CEO at Shape Talent, Sharon Peake. Hi, Sharon.
Hello.
Who is going to be offering strategies for navigating menopause at an organizational level, very much based on the work that we at Shape Talent do with complex multinational companies. So I'm delighted to have all of you with me today. And just for those of you joining us, give you a sense of what to expect. We've got about 45 minutes today, so we're letting it breathe. We've got three fantastic guests. And I think it's also a topic that generates a lot of interest and a lot of questions. So the idea is that I will chat to each of our guests and leave some space at the end for questions and answers. So please, as we're chatting, do use the chat, the comments, to put in your questions, and we will then come to those at the end. And I should warn you, get them in early, because what we tend to see with events like this is there's a sort of flurry of questions at the last minute, and then we run out of time. And if you don't put any questions in, I can go all day. I have so many questions on this topic. So get them in or you won't get a chance, is all I would say to you. So let's dive in to this topic. And Sharon, I'm going to come to you first, actually, because there may be, despite the zeitgeist and the fact that menopause, particularly here in the UK, has become a very big issue, lots of discussion about it and the impact on women at work. But there may still be people who say, oh, you know, is this really a workplace thing? Why are we banging on about this? So why are we talking about this today?
Yeah, well, that's a great question, Rachel. And I think maybe some scale helps people understand why we need to talk about this. If we look globally, there are around 300 million women of menopausal age in the workplace globally. So this is not a side issue. It is not a peripheral issue. It is something that affects millions and millions of women in the workplace. It impacts their ability to do their job, to do their best at work. So I think it's important. There's a scale here that is really important that we can't ignore. The other thing that we are seeing and hearing a lot more of lately is, sadly, gendered ageism. We're having conversations with clients around gendered ageism at the moment. So for many of us, we live in societies which sadly are quite ageist. We see that, we hear that from the women that we're working with day in, day out, from the research that's out there. And of course, at a certain age, menopause hits women. The average age for women experiencing menopause is 51. And we live in a society that sometimes thinks that if your age begins with a 5, then you're a little bit old. And as a 51-year-old, I do not think you're too old if you're in your 50s, but sadly, society sometimes does. So I think there are barriers that women face that are cumulative. So if you combine gender, if you combine age, if you combine ethnicity in the mix, the barriers tend to accumulate. So I think it's really important to talk about this so we can start to dismantle some of the structural barriers that are getting in the way for women at work. And I might just say there's one other thing here that is also worth considering. It's not just menopause, it's actually perimenopause, the phase before you get into menopause, the years leading up to menopause where the symptoms might come and go and you don't really know what's going on. The penny may not have dropped that you're actually perimenopausal. It's those years that are also really, really crucial to understand, and for employers to be able to understand what the impact is on women so they can support them, so they can get the best out of their workforce. So that's why I'm delighted to be part of this fabulous panel today, because I think it's such an important topic for us to be talking about.
Yeah, thanks, Sharon. I'm going to bring you in now, Anne, because it is such a big and fantastic topic, and it's a topic that the BSI has really got stuck into. So you have released a BSI standard on menstruation, menstrual health and menopause. I think that might confuse people. BSI to me was sort of kite marks and safe crash helmets, and people think, what's the BSI doing in the world of menopause and perimenopause? Tell us more about how this has come about.
Okay, well, thanks, Rachel. And first of all, let's just do the age thing. And my number starts with a 6, so I feel you're all you're all mere beginners on this journey. But I think for BSI, it's been a real progression and a real journey for moving more into how do organisations ensure that they keep their people in their organization. We have a skills gap, we have people leaving early, we have people looking at different alternatives and where they want to work. And actually, one of the challenges that over 50% of the workforce has is their natural body cycles that they go through. And it is wrong to ignore that, and it's wrong to not provide guidance for people. However, we live in an age at the moment where people aren't used to talking about such things. And so a lot of organizations who either have a very male dominated, or may have a male leadership, or just have very young people in senior positions, which is great and fantastic and something to be congratulated, means that people aren't used to and don't have the tools that they need in order to enable all of their workforce to feel valued and part of their community. And therefore, what we did is we gathered together a group of experts in the field of menopause and menstrual health to actually start to write down information that would enable organizations of all shapes, all sizes, from the largest to the smallest, in the public sector, in the third sector, anywhere, that actually would enable them to have something that they could use as a toolkit to tackle this issue. And I think that's really why, BSI stepped forward, because we feel that we have those links into organizations. People are used to using standards, people are used to kite marks and things like that. I think it's quite challenging for other organizations who maybe aren't quite so used to us, but actually it's a really useful toolkit that will enable any leader to actually start to consider the needs of all of their people.
I really like the word you've used there, because it's called a BSI standard, but people might think, well, what is that? Can I touch it? Can I, But you said it's a toolkit. So if people are interested and want to get their hands on this, what do they actually get a hold of? What's in it?
So absolutely, and I mean, I think standards can be written in quite an unfriendly way. So they can be, they're very they're not written as a story. They're written as, this is what you need to do. And so what we've done is we've produced a standard which is about 60 pages and free to download off our website. But we've also produced a guidebook which is called The Little Book to Menstrual Health, Menstruation and Menopause. And actually that gives people a taster in quite an easy way to use. And we will have the links available for people to do that. But what they get, I mean, the first thing they get actually when they open up the standard is a myth busting section, which actually talks about, this is what it isn't. This is what a menopause isn't. This is what a menstrual process isn't. And actually that helps people as they start to tackle some of those challenges that they may face. And then it goes through talking about the things that an organization may want to have in place. So whether they've got a policy in place, what they need to ensure that their managers need to know about, what the law is a little bit, but then links out to other useful sites, other useful information, as well as provides some ideas for things that people can try in their organization. And just to stress, I think for large organizations, this is difficult because of the numbers of people they have in there, but easy because they will have departments that deal with their people. That's their job. If you're a small business and actually you've got 50 things as an MD that you're meant to be thinking about. Actually, having something like this standard to act as your toolkit is a really useful guide and provides you with an excellent reason and no excuse for why you're not taking action.
Yeah, and what I'm sensing then is that it's very practical. It's very much about what can we go and do, what do we need in place, organizationally, in terms of our guidelines, in terms of support for people. And I know you've been working very closely with companies who've been trialing this for you, feeding back, places like M&S, Oxford
Yep.
Brookes University, Virgin Media. Tell us a little bit about what you've been discovering and how people are using this effectively.
Yeah, so I think Virgin Media O2 are very interesting in that they used it actually to help them create a SWOT analysis on what they were doing well and what they were where they had gaps. So let's not say what they were doing not so, where they had gaps is a fair place to go. And actually, it helped them say, okay, we've got these things covered, and these are the areas that we need to look at. And they've then been able to create an action plan that they can then put into place. And I think that really helps. One, the communication with your people in that you can say, this is what we know we're doing okay, but actually we're already aware that we've got these gaps and this is the action that we're going to take towards that. So people see some movement and some progress with what's happening. You come to someone like M&S. I mean, what a great organization to use as an example in that, over 50% of their workforce is female. I mean, it's dominated by female. And actually, if you go to M&S, any store, you will see that the age range is very diverse, probably from very young to more my age. And actually, they will have all sorts of things that people will be facing. And there, one of the things that they've done is really look at the uniforms that they have people in. So when people get hot and they're suffering and it's kind of challenging, they've been very open to the fact that they have had to look at different uniforms for people, and in fact have done something like 98,000 pieces of uniform to help people. That is phenomenal, and that makes a real difference to people, and is a huge success. And they've based that on their work they did by using the standard. And with Oxford Brookes, I mean, I was talking with them a few weeks ago, and actually, I think what's really interesting about them, they've done all sorts of things, very much focused on menopause and the menstrual health side of it. So thinking about students and when they come in and what they may be dealing with, as well as lecturers and what they may be dealing with. And I think with Oxford Brookes, what's the biggest learning that I've taken from them is the language they use. They're not afraid to say menopause. They're not afraid to say menstrual health or menstruation. And I think that's something that's quite a challenge for people. The first time I spoke about this publicly, I think one of my first sentences was, I never thought I'd be saying this on a stage in front of sort of 250 people. And yeah, there we are. That's what we're now doing. And I think that's for Oxford Brookes, that's really changed the way they approach the whole subject.
Yeah, and it's going to be really interesting to come to Lynn in a little bit to get some perspectives from inside a company about some of this stuff as well. But Anne, before we move on, I'd love to just invite you to sort of narrow this down, because there's so much there. It's fantastic. And as you mentioned, we're going to put the links in the comments so people can access this, they can download it. But if you had to summarize, first of all, some sort of top key tips, I don't know,
Yeah.
3-5 tips for organizations who are thinking, well, where might we start? What comes to mind?
So the first thing I would say is don't be scared. Start, because anything you do is progress, and I think that's the first thing I would say. The second thing is I'd call things by the proper names. Don't sort of mutter in a corner about time of the month, or oh, she's just a bit hot flush, or "Oh, you know what that is." Actually, call it what it is, and ensure that people don't feel embarrassed or ashamed about raising any of the issues they have. The third, and I think probably the most important thing, is make sure you treat people as individuals, because everybody's experience, like everything in life, is very, very different. And I think it's really important that you take the time to listen so that you understand what everybody's experience is, and what that particular person may need. And finally, probably my other thing is the other half of the population that we have in our working lives actually needs support too. It's
Mm,
not acceptable to ignore men in this, because actually we're asking them to cope with an awful lot and to get into conversations that probably their mothers never had with them. And so I think it's about ensuring that you provide them with the tools, the guidance, and the support that they may need when dealing with some very challenging conversations where somebody is really struggling with the things that they're facing, and making sure that they're able to provide that support in the way that they want to do it.
yeah, I think that's super important. And I guess your main focus, of course, is at the organizational level. But if there are people listening who are individuals, women managing menstruation and menopause in the workplace, any tips for people as individuals if they're thinking, oh, I am struggling with this and I don't quite know how to sort of bring it up, or I'd love my workplace to do something? Where might they
Yeah, so I think what I would say then is one is don't be afraid to raise it, because I think actually people are far more open to having these conversations now. So I think you should raise it. If you don't get the response you might have hoped for or anticipated, I think you should raise it again, actually, and I think you should certainly do that. But I think there's an awful lot of support groups out there that people can reach out to and get advice from. We found that small organisations have tended to have, in some instances, gathered together to create a support network in a local area, so that actually you might only have a workforce of maybe 10 people, but actually you can join with other organisations to create a community that helps you tackle this. So I think it's about not being afraid to raise it, and actually coming up with novel suggestions of where you could go, and just download a copy of the standard and provide that to your organization, and actually say, this is what you could be looking at. It will provide you with links with all sorts of other places, and it's a great place to start.
Fantastic. And thank you. I'm going to park that for
Yep.
now, but please use the chat if you've got questions for Anne, if there are things that you want to hear a little bit more about. And as I say, do download the standard as well. But let me bring in Lynn at this point. It seems like a really nice place in which to segue to the kind of individual journey. And you've very kindly, you're totally walking the walk here, Lynn, of doing exactly what Anne has said, which is to talk about it, to destigmatize it, to own it, to use the proper words, and to fly the flag a little bit. So you've kindly kind of volunteered to talk to us both about your own experiences and also about what Ericsson specifically is doing as an employer to support women. But if we might start with you then, maybe you can share a little bit of your experience about how perimenopause, menopause impacted your professional journey.
Yeah, thank you, Rachel. So I think one of the things that surprised me the most about perimenopause and menopause was, despite being part of a really strong community of women, having amazing woman friends, still having older women in my life, family members, how little I entered menopause knowing. I mean, that's still something when I look back, and just sort of 2 years ago, how little I knew, and how little I knew what to expect, what it meant, and what the implications would be of my hormones changing. So one of the things I just think is so important, and you're right, I do talk about this. I talk about this a lot, including at work, is just the importance of knowledge. And I'm so grateful, and to organizations like yourself that are doing work in this place and this space and making knowledge available to everybody. Because I think, even 5 years ago, just the amount of books that were available, or articles, or let alone standards and support available for corporates was basically non-existent. And here I think the UK, I'm based in Stockholm, Sweden, but here I think the UK really has been leading the charge with women like Davina McCall, Louise Newson, really starting to speak about menopause and the implications of that for us and for our partners and for our children. So I would say the very first thing for me was just, I became an information junkie. Trying to read up as much as possible, trying to understand. I love the work of a woman called Dr. Mosconi, Lisa Mosconi. She's doing a lot of work specifically on women and the impact that menopause has on our brain. And sadly, she's actually the only scientist who's specializing in this. And she's made a real call to action for other scientists to please join her so that they have broader research available and not just the work that she's doing. So she's written a couple of fantastic books, one called The XX Brain, which is very much about the implications of our changing hormones on our brain. And that for me was it was new. I had absolutely no idea that menopause was going to fundamentally alter how my brain received and processed hormones and information. And I think in the beginning, I was expecting the physical changes that would happen, no longer having a period, the hot flushes that I knew everybody complained about. But what I didn't expect was that, like, one day, literally waking up and feeling like my brain had been unplugged.
Yeah.
And that was so scary, I kind of, for a couple of months, just getting everything wrong. Dinner invitations, taking my husband to the opera on totally the wrong night, forgetting, meetings that were important. And then sort of reaching out to girlfriends and saying, like, how do you do this? And, I've developed survival mechanisms, like making very detailed notes in meetings and summarizing my action points at the end of the day. But I think, Rachel, to your question, I was just surprised how little information was available and how little even we as women, who I think are so powerful when we are a collective, how little we talked about it.
Yeah, I can see Anne and Sharon both nodding, and I totally agree. You're taught all about periods and sexual health and sexual relationship, but nobody goes beyond. Once you're about 21, they're like, right, you're done. You're off.
Exactly.
Yeah, nobody revisits it again, and you're like, well, where did this come from? But and you've spoken very honestly there about that sense of the sort of brain fog, the unplugging of your brain, and I wonder what impact that had on you professionally. You have a big job. You're head of networks at Ericsson. That can be very unsettling, I think, for a lot of women who feel like, I look like I've lost a grip here. I'm making mistakes. I can't retain information. I remember Davina McCall, as you were saying, was talking about being on set as a TV presenter and getting ready to introduce someone and having, I have no idea what this person's name is. Now, she found a workaround. She had a lovely producer who would whisper in her ear and say, this is Sarah Smith. She's from blah, blah, blah. But it can be devastating for one's confidence and a sense of what happened to the poised professional woman that I was.
Totally. And Rachel, I have to say, I am just really honest about it. So I know sometimes it's quite shocking for people. So I can be in a meeting and I can say, I'm really sorry, but I clearly have very low estrogen today and my brain is not working. Like, can you remind me what was that I said I would do? And it's been a fun journey. And I know some of my team on the call today, I think in the beginning, it was really shocking for people. I could see people would be like, oh no, what did she just say, the M word or the E word? Like, did that just happen? And now I think everybody just expects it. Well, I don't even have to say it because they just know it. So I think using the words like you were both saying, calling it what it is, and you were saying, like, use the word menopause, use periods or menstruation, just saying what it is without it being euphemisms for something secretive that happens in the background really helps and gives permission to other women to also speak about it in the workplace. So I would say that's the biggest thing. Sorry.
Yeah. No, and I was going to then take it to that next step, because of course at one level we're dealing with it as individuals, but the whole point of things like the BSI standard and what you've been doing at Ericsson is that you're trying to think about, well, how do we then support women as employers? How do we pull all of this information, these experiences together? So what have Ericsson been doing? What have they been trialing? And what's been the impact of this raised awareness of this issue?
So, we're doing a number of things at a really kind of systemic level. So across the organization, we have 100,000 employees across the globe in more than 80 countries. So trying to find something that is universally true and acceptable and available to everybody has been one of the things I think that's really important. And for that, we have partnered with a global healthcare provider, and we provide something called Ericsson Care. And there, all employees and their family members have access to actually health coaching. So, it's a care line, so you could call them with like an amazing variety of questions, but one of which is particularly relevant here is health coaching. So you could actually get the support of a health and wellbeing coach to work with you at a very individual level about changes that you may want to make in your life. In addition to that, we run the part that I love and that I'm very deeply involved in is that we run coaching circles for women in menopause. And they're small groups, 8 to 10 women maximum. And the thing that I really love is on one community, it runs for 8 weeks. In one community, we can have women from Kenya, France, Mexico, the US, Sweden, and just the power of having these women come together to share their experiences of menopause, perimenopause, what they are experiencing, what they are hearing from their own practitioners. The number of women who are already on antidepressants, I think, is always something that I find so deeply saddening. because I think it's a quick fix and nobody's asking the right questions. So we do an 8-week coaching circle where we really we talk about the fundamentals of functional medicine. So it's rooted in lifestyle, stress, what we eat, how we move, how we sleep, and really importantly, the relationships that we invest in. And this group of 10 women become an amazing support group for each other, where they start to construct and become accountability buddies for small lifestyle changes. It could just be about how I start to prepare myself for sleep, as an example. And then once we finish the program, we have something called the Queen Ages, where once a month we all get together and we continue to share stories and success stories, sometimes sad stories, challenges, people asking for help and support, top tips like, my brain is no longer working. I have a presentation on Tuesday. Who's been through that and who can help? So I think creating a sense of community has been an amazing thing that Ericsson has done, to be really proactive in this space and say, let's have the conversation.
Yeah. So I'm hearing there some really key themes around support, women working and supporting with other women, the Ericsson actually offering a lot of information and health support. What about perhaps some of the policies around how women are, and everybody really are working, to do with flexible working, where you might work, if you're feeling, that you're struggling on a given day? Have you seen some changes there at Ericsson?
So, I mean, we are absolutely one of the companies that were very quick when COVID happened to instantly almost jump to like 100% remote working. We have the technology in place. Ericsson was incredibly supportive of establishing at-home working arrangements. And now we are sort of slowly starting to come back to the office more and retaining flexibility. So what I would say is, for any of our colleagues who have any particular challenges, they are absolutely able to continue to work flexibly. And again, I think the communication piece is really important. So we have information also on our intranet site for all managers, for all employees, how to have the conversation if you need to around, your well-being and things that may be affecting you, not just menopause, but where you specifically need some additional flexibility.
Yeah. And I'm going to move on to Sharon in a moment. Just one final question, less about Ericsson, but you picked earlier on. We were having a laugh off camera. But you actually mentioned something that Anne had talked about in her answers as well, which was where the men fit in. And I know because you've been working on this a lot, you were laughing and saying your husband said, well, you ought to run some kind of support group for the husbands of people who are going through this. And of course, it was a throwaway remark, but actually there is a role for men in this, isn't there?
Absolutely. And again, I think coming back to knowledge and education and information, again, in our coaching circles, we share things like podcasts that maybe we could listen to with our partners, or even maybe with our children, so that they start to become more comfortable with the language around menopause and understanding, the consequences, some of those quite short term, maybe the moodiness, the like irrational anger that some of us have, or the total forgetfulness, or whatever it may be. But really being able to find channels that feel safe to share that information with partners and with children and colleagues. Again, I think that's a really important part.
Yeah, we're back to communication, which is where Anne very much started. And just looking in the comments here, Sarah, thank you for your comment. Yes, about the need for more academic research. You've shared a couple of thoughts there about some of the work that's going on. Thank you for that. And I can see the odd question coming in, which we'll turn to in a moment. But first, let me turn to you, Sharon Peake, our founder here at Shape Talent. So we will look at this very much from an organizational point of view, the work we're doing in the space around gender equity and gender equality, going in, working with big multinational organizations. And when you look at this and when you're brought in, what are some of the things that you would be saying to organizations that they should think about and activate?
Yeah, well, I think there's some great tips and recommendations that we've heard already from Anne and Lynn. So just to build on that, and maybe also just to reflect that different countries are in different stages of dialogue around this. We were talking about this before we got on the call, that I was at a conference in Europe last week and the topic of menopause came up, and someone said it's still taboo in the US very much. It's not a topic that you easily have in the workplace. The words do not come easily. The UK, I think, has been having this conversation for a couple of years, helped by the BSI standard, helped by the Davina McCall documentary, helped by kind of some, big name doctors writing about it, talking about it. So I think the UK, maybe the dialogue is a bit more progressed than in other countries around the world. So it's worth remembering that too for multinational organizations who are trying to put in place something across countries, that everyone is in a different starting point here. But I think, there's probably about four or five things that I would say here. First of all, go and download the BSI standard. If you haven't seen it, go and download it, read it, see what you can extract for that. It is a great starting point to figure out, as Anne said, what's your gap analysis? What else could you be doing? What are you doing now? What aren't you doing? What could you put in place? So I think starting with the BSI standard is a great place. I think you also need to ask employees what they want. I think it was Anne that mentioned taking a personalized approach to this. So every woman has different experiences. So Lynn talked about the hot flushes, the physical symptoms that you expect. I'm menopausal, I've never had a hot flush. So, I don't experience some of the really common, one of the most common menopausal symptoms. I did experience the brain fog. I still experience the brain fog. It was very debilitating when that first happened, and I didn't know what it was. I actually said to my husband at the time, I think I've had a mini stroke, because I didn't use the terminology, my brain has become unplugged, but I thought I just can't problem solve. Things that should take me 20 seconds to figure out were taking me 20 minutes to figure out. I just couldn't understand what was going on. So everyone has different experiences. And so asking your employees what would be helpful to them, I think, is a great starting point. And of course, you can't do that unless you've got some psychological safety in the organization. You can't go from having zero conversation to asking very deeply personal, maybe possibly invasive questions. You've got to build up to that. So ask employees, find the right way to ask employees what they want. There are some commitments that organizations can make to being menopause aware. So there is a pledge that organizations can sign up to. We've signed up to it as Shape Talent, the Wellbeing of Women Menopause Pledge. And it's simply a commitment that you make as an organization that you're going to respect the challenges around menopause. You're going to encourage open dialogue about it, using the words, having the conversation. You're not going to skirt around it. And that you're going to actively support women who are experiencing menopause. So you can sign up to the pledge to help normalize the discussion, to help kind of bring it into the organization. And then in terms of practical things that organizations can do, they vary. So first of all, having a policy, if you don't already have one, is a great starting point. So having a policy outlining what you will do as an organization to support employees experiencing menopause. Workplace adjustments, and this is covered in the standard, of course. What are some of the flexible working adjustments that you could make, or physical adjustments? Anne gave the example of M&S adjusting the uniforms of women to be more comfortable. So workplace adjustments, access to medical support. So Lynn talked about, was Ericsson Care, which gives some medical coaching support. So some organizations we're seeing are giving support to access menopause doctors, menopause counselors, for example. So depending on the size of the organization, that might be something that you consider. We also run menopause coaching circles. So Lynn talked about the coaching circles and how powerful they are for small groups of 8 to 10 women. These can be facilitated internally within your own organization. You can have someone like Shape Talent facilitate them. It doesn't matter how you do them, but actually providing a forum that is safe for women to share their experiences, to start to feel normal, to not go through what Lynn and I described of thinking, what's going on? I don't understand what's going on. Actually having some supportive colleagues around you can be a real game changer. So So that's helpful. And then the final thing I would add is for organizations that want to think more systemically about how to dismantle some of the barriers that get in the way from a gender equity point of view, one of which is acknowledging, talking about, acting on menopause and providing support. We do run more systemic group coaching, 3 barriers group coaching circles, where we get groups together, mixed gender groups, to talk about how we systemically dismantle some of the barriers that women face at different life stages during their careers. So to kind of helicopter up a bit and look at, you know, systemically what's getting in the way for women, menopause being one of them, and how it's managed in the workplace, we can help groups of people to play a more active role in kind of addressing the causes at their root.
Brilliant. Such a rich discussion, so many practical takeaways. I'm going to dive into the chat now because I can see a question or two. Now's your moment. If you've got questions, please start putting them in because we only have about 10 minutes left. But this is probably one to throw to you first of all, Sharon, but Lynn, Anne, you might want to come in on this as well. But you were talking, Sharon, about gendered ageism, and we've had a question here saying, given that existence of gendered ageism, how can organisations change their recruitment practices to ensure that older women aren't excluded from successfully continuing their careers, particularly given what both you and Lynn were saying about, you know, they might show up to interview feeling a bit lousy, feeling like they haven't had a chance to quite gather their thoughts. Any ideas on where recruitment discussions fit into this, Sharon?
Yeah, it's a great question because, of course, recruitment is one of the gatekeeping processes that can screen out large numbers of people. So recruitment is important. Of course, your promotion and development processes are also important so that women can still progress within the workplace. Look, I think there's a whole bunch of things that can be done here, from kind of blind screening of CVs to kind of remove gender to kind of workplace accommodations. If interviews are being held in person, making sure there are accommodations, making sure that the question is asked at some point in the interview scheduling process as to, do you have any kind of needs that we need to take into account? I think it really starts with just being aware that discrimination happens in these processes. Most organizations that we work with would never consciously be discriminating in recruitment. Nobody kind of wants to be doing that consciously. It is generally happening subconsciously, and it's generally happening with processes that just don't think about the different needs people have. So I think part of the solution is being aware that this might be happening in your organization. So maybe doing some data analysis of how many people have you hired, who's got to shortlist, who's got through interview, who's getting promoted. Have a look at it by age and by gender. And of course, ageism cuts across all genders, by the way. It's not just women, but in our world, we are particularly interested in gendered ageism. So have a look at some of the data, because sometimes that can point to an issue that you didn't even know existed. So I would encourage organizations, if you're not already analyzing your data, to look at where discrimination can happen, to have a look at that to start with.
Yeah, thank you. Really great answer. But Lynn, Anne, was there anything you wanted to add on that?
I would just say diversity in the selection process matters, you know, so making sure that whatever colleagues or, you know, hiring people a candidate is meeting, that you have diversity across that journey, because you need to make sure there's representation. I always just think that the recent Olympics is such a great example where you had, I think it was the first time that there was on-site childcare in the Olympic Village. And that's because for the first time we had a woman on the Olympic board, you know, somebody who had had that experience and thought, you know what, that really was something that influenced me during those couple of weeks, and I'd like to offer a solution for others. So I think that diversity in selection matters.
Yeah.
The thing I would add, Rachel, is really that I think when you're applying for things, you can look on organisations' websites and see what their stated policies are, see whether there's something in there, and you can actually ask the question if you get to interview. I mean, I would now very much ask those questions myself, because actually, do you want to go into an organisation where they're not thinking in this way and they're not thinking about these things? And I think we should be challenging back. So that's a slightly different way round of looking at it. I think Sharon and Lynn have covered everything else. I think it's excellent answer. So that would be my
But maybe
contribution.
just to build on that, if we look at it from an employer's point of view, it isn't, we've got to think about how we attract the best talent. And
Yeah.
so one way of doing that is to have these policies, is to make them public, is to make them available, is to have it as part of your employer value proposition. So absolutely, I would agree
I
with
mean,
that.
and the follow-up question I usually get asked at that point is, well, organisations can have lots of policies, but they don't always, they're up there as a policy rather than living and breathing it. And I think then it's up to you to ask the questions about, well, how do you demonstrate that? What are you doing? Have you got an example you can give me where somebody has done X, Y, and Z? And I think an interview is a two-way process. Yes, you might be looking for a role, but equally they're looking for talent, as you say, Sharon. I think you can push back on that.
Yeah, and I'd love to just stay with you, Anne, for a moment, actually, on that issue of the kind of what's important about this, because on the one hand, we've talked about it's about supporting women, it's about making sure everybody has equal access, but in the big picture, it's also about the business case. As Sharon was saying, you want the best people, and in the case of menopause, you want to retain your talent. You don't want to lose really good women who are just in a period of their life where they just need a little bit of extra support. They're going to come out of it the other side. And I wonder what you're noticing, what you're hearing perhaps from some of the organizations you've worked with about the impact of actually implementing these on their business, and the fact that it makes financial sense and good sense as an employer, not just to be nice, but because it's your bottom line will be affected.
Yeah, so I think the first thing I would say is we did some research I'm going to say in 23, I think it was in 23, which we called the second glass ceiling, which was really around the impact having women in senior roles in organizations that has on younger people coming in. So the fact that you've got people there, you're retaining that experience, but also you've got that leadership that is female, means that younger females will want to come in and work there because they believe there's a path for them. So and that was the risk really we were trying to highlight, is the fact that if you don't address this, you end up losing that experience. And actually, where is your example? Where is your route that people can go? Do you know what? I'm having one of those moments, Rachel, where I've forgotten the whole part of your question. But well,
That's quite all right. Yeah, maybe about what impact this has on the bottom line for businesses, how they need to perhaps understand retention is very important and will
yeah.
cost
I mean,
them a lot.
if you look at the cost of recruitment, I mean, Sharon probably's got those numbers more to hand than I have, but the cost of recruitment, the time that you spend, and then the time you spend training people and developing people, it's massive. And interesting enough, what Oxford Brookes said to me a couple of weeks ago was that what they're finding is that because of their policies and they're very open, um, dealing with the issues of sort of menstrual health, probably more for what I'm about to say, but also menopause, is that they're finding students are actually coming to them because they're very open about it, and because they have a policy, and because they're demonstrating action, and because they're happy to talk about it and explain what they're doing to support students as they go through sometimes very difficult times in their lives. They might be moving away from home, they might have not got their support structure there, they might not have access to all the products that they would normally have, and actually the university is really helping them with that. So I think we're still sort of, the standard's been out a year, we're still looking at how it's being used, we're still looking at how it's impacting. If I think about how many times it's been downloaded for a standard, we would say it's been downloaded a lot. Do you know what, as a percentage of the organizations that are out there, it's not a lot. So there's still an awful lot of work to be done on people picking it up, addressing it, or picking up something and addressing the issues that are there, because there's a huge amount of opportunity out there that is just sitting there waiting to be filled.
Yeah. I'm going to we're coming to an end. I'm just keeping an eye in case I've missed any questions, but I think we're okay. But just on that idea that we want more people to engage with this, more employers to download, to get stuck in. Let me finish asking all of you this question, but I'll start with you, Anne. How optimistic are you about this as a topic, given that you've been immersed in this, pulling the standard together, working with organizations, but knowing that there's still a way to go to get this properly embedded, to get all companies taking this on board? How optimistic do you feel?
I feel pretty optimistic. I've certainly in the UK, you've got a government at the moment who are talking about it. They're talking about it pre-election and they're talking about it post-election, and I think they're very committed to encouraging organisations to deal with the issue. I think internationally or globally, I think it's a really interesting challenge. I think the UK actually are well ahead, as you said, Sharon. And I think that what we're doing at the moment is we're currently starting to take this standard into the international world, so into ISO. We've got sort of it's been downloaded across 100 countries. We've got 40 countries, I think, involved in the development of the international standard. And it's very interesting getting a full sort of global view on this subject. I think I'm optimistic because I think there's so much opportunity there that can be built on. I'm probably a little bit concerned about the amount of effort it takes to make some organizations take it seriously. And I think there is so much information out there now. I don't think there is an excuse to not act. And I think that's probably my biggest message is there is no excuse. So do something about it. That's really for me.
Yeah, there we go. And Lynn, let me come to you, and then finally I'll give the final word to Sharon. But obviously you've lived it personally, but you're also very interested in this organisationally, but you're based in Sweden, so you see this from different perspectives. How optimistic are you, Lynn, that we're going to see the kind of work that Ericsson is doing more widely adopted?
I would say at a company level, I'm more optimistic because I think companies have more to lose by not doing something and getting engaged in this space. At a country level, I think I'm less optimistic. And this is another one of those kind of buckets where I feel like knowledge belongs to those of us who are privileged enough to have access to the internet or to even be able to ask the questions publicly. Even in Sweden, hormone replacement therapy is something that I have to pay for personally and is not at all covered by if I took regular antibiotics or anything like that, there would be some high cost protection. So for many women, things like hormones are just economically out of reach. And that's even in a country like Sweden. So I think, again, getting, to anyone listening, our call to action is getting women into decision-making roles so that we can start to change this at a truly systemic level and make sure that all women everywhere have knowledge, education, and can advocate for themselves on what they need.
Yeah, I love that call to action. And Sharon, let me give the final word to you. I know this is something you're fully invested in, both through Shape Talent and at a personal level. You've spoken very, very honestly about your own journey. Are you feeling good looking into the future?
I am actually, and I take Lynn's point. I think it's a really important one, that it's not just what organisations can do, but it's what the societies and the medical system in those societies does as well that is really important. And while we can't control that necessarily, we can influence what organisations are doing. And I'm feeling optimistic about that. Actually, I have seen how much of a movement we've made in the UK in just a couple of years, from this not being something that I heard anyone talk about to it being freely discussed. And if we can do that in a couple of years, then I think we can do that in other countries too, and particularly multinationals who are operating across borders, who've got policies that might extend across borders. I think organisations can play a really positive step in facilitating change. So I'm feeling really optimistic, actually, that we're going to get it into mainstream conversation, and that's going to benefit both women and organisations.
Yeah, fantastic. Our time is out. I feel we could go on and on about this. This is such an interesting space, and I'm so grateful to all of you for contributing to today's discussion, to Sharon, to Anne, to Lynn. If you have questions that you want to pick up, you want to hear more about the BSI standard, of course, download it. The link is in the chat. But if you want to catch up with Anne, you want to hear about the work that Shape Talent are doing through Sharon, if you want to hear about Ericsson's policies, Lynn can be contacted. All of us are very available on LinkedIn, so do reach out to us. But in the meantime, enjoy and celebrate World Menopause Day on Friday. And the next date for your diary will be in November. Our next LinkedIn Breaking Barriers Live is going to be around succession planning at senior leadership level, but specifically through the gender equity lens. Look out for more news on that. We'll be announcing the date and the guest lineup soon. But for now, thank you very much to Sharon, Anne, and Lynn, and we'll look forward to seeing you all next month. Thanks very much, everybody.
Thanks very much.
Thank you, everyone.